Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to this discussion with us. And today I have David Pullman and Marek Kizer. And later I will have, or we have, Tim Howard, who is also joining with us. But anyways, before we go into further discussion, I would like to ask about the backgrounds of these gentlemen. And we can start with David. So, David, tell us about yourself. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's not much that's interesting about me. I'm a Christian apologist, seminary student. I have a YouTube channel called Faith Because of Reason, where I do apologetic and theological videos. You can check out the work I do there. On this issue, I'm a proponent of intelligent design.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And so, what was the name for your channel, by the way?
Faith Because of Reason.
Oh, yeah. So, make sure to check out Dave's page. And yeah. And the next guest is Marek Kizer. And please tell about yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just a teenager from Indiana. I got into this discussion a while back after I was a young Earth creationist, but then became an old Earth creationist through drama and all that sort of thing. But because of that, I've recognized the flaw in this young Earth creationist view, and I've really had a passion to expose it and discuss it with other people. One of my friends recently converted to this view, so me and him are now working on starting a YouTube channel type thing, start debating young Earth creationists, that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. So, yeah, it's great to have you here, guys. And without further ado, we could start with Dave and discussing about the general idea of intelligent design in a scientific perspective and theological perspective as well. So, yeah, I would like to ask about Dave and Marek as well. That is the intelligent design theory science, or can we talk about science when it comes to intelligent design theory?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Well, yeah, the charge is often made that intelligent design is not science. And at that point, you just have to ask the question, well, what is science? And science is, of course, a study of the natural world, study of the physical world. We allow the detectability of design in every other field of study. We allow in archaeology, we're allowed to detect design and we find it. We're allowed, in forensics, if detectives are investigating something that could potentially be a murder, then we allow them to detect design there. So theoretically, there doesn't seem to be any reason why, if design were present in biology, we shouldn't be able to detect it. And that's essentially all intelligent design is. We don't even have to say that there is design there, but just as a scientific enterprise, all it requires is that design be detectable. And if we have criteria for detecting what design is, as I would argue that we do, and virtually everybody in every other field recognizes, then there doesn't seem to be any in principle reason that we shouldn't be able to detect design in biology if we find it there.
Yeah, interesting. And Marek, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so science wouldn't really be my forte, but I think I'd be in agreement with David. I think people that critique intelligent design, they're inconsistent. They allow inferences of design from all other fields of study, but when it comes to biology, they're like, don't infer design from that. And it just seems very inconsistent. And I don't see any reason to not infer design. I think it's the best explanation. So I'd probably definitely be in agreement with David, but again, science isn't really my thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and if I share my own thoughts, well, yeah, sure. I think, as Dave concluded, that the general idea of intelligent design is, of course, science. When you ponder the idea of basic principles, which like Charles Darwin or other scientists has used in the past, and I think Stephen Meyer points out pretty well that, you know, regardless of the background of the designer or the ontology of designer, we could still conclude that there is indeed design in nature. By, for example, well, Stephen Meyer takes information as an example, and how the basic principle of science could conclude that the information technology has only a couple explanations of its origin, and the first explanation would be the the idea that somebody has programmed the code into the system, regardless if it's biological or other kind of a system like computer. And the second option would be that the information got somehow there in naturalistic sense, which I think we can later discuss about. And yeah, so in general, I don't think there is good way to say that, you know, intelligent designs is somehow not scientific theory, although you would know the basic idea of designer behind the theory, which means that there is like different kind of theists or non-theists who are adherents of intelligent design. So yeah. Yeah, so the second point would be, or the second question which I would like to ask is what does the intelligent design tells us about the nature of designer? And so yeah, you can.
Yeah, we want to be careful on that question because for a lot of reasons. One of the big criticisms of intelligent design is that, you know, this is just Christian apologetics, this is creation science, this is all the stuff that we've already dealt with before, and, you know, we don't want to rehash all of that. And there's a danger there, particularly when you have people who are interested in apologetics, like myself, who want to utilize intelligent design as a teleological argument for God. Now that's fine, but we need to be careful that we aren't going beyond what the science allows. So science can tell us that, you know, something like you brought up Stephen Meyer and the evidence of information in DNA as an argument for intelligent design. And I mean, I think it's a good one. I've defended it myself. And but all that lets us conclude is that there is a designer. It's not going to tell us what the designer is, who the designer is, and we do need to be careful about making, you know, those sorts of inferences. In fact, you know, young Earth creationists and even some theistic evolutionists have made this criticism of intelligent design, that it doesn't get you to the God of the Bible. Presuppositionalists love to make that argument of, oh, well, you know, you've just proved deism at this point. And I'm happy to say yes to that, because that's all intelligent design. In fact, I wouldn't even say that intelligent design gets you to God per se. Like, we don't get that that the being is omnipotent out of intelligent design. We don't get that the being is all-knowing out of intelligent design. We definitely don't get that the being is omnibenevolent and incarnated that he exists in three persons, and that the second one incarnated himself in human history and died for the sins of people. You don't get any of that out of intelligent design. So what we get out of it is that there is intelligence out there, intelligence that is responsible for us. And if you want to use that with other arguments from natural theology and argue that the most parsimonious explanation for all the data is God, which is, what the good Christian apologist will do with intelligent design, then that is fine. But then you're bringing in other philosophical arguments like the Kalam and stuff, and you're going beyond intelligent design to get God out of it, and then you're just using intelligent design as part of that. So we do have to be careful that all intelligent design gets us to is that there is some sort of intelligence that is responsible for life on Earth.
Yeah, good points, indeed. Marek, do you have any thoughts about this question?
I don't have too many thoughts, but I think I would agree with David, and I would probably even put emphasis on, I'm not sure if ID would even get us to monotheism, which I believe David would agree with, but I think it's just important to put emphasis on that, because sometimes people can misunderstand that.
Yeah. Well, personally, I would agree with you. So when we discuss about the nature of designer in this theory, it as I said before, there are many theists in the intelligent design community, I guess, and it doesn't even apply necessarily at theism. So, but I would say the great question would be that if it doesn't imply God, then what kind of being would have done this sort of design? And if we say, well, aliens or some other civilization did it, then how can we actually confirm that? If we don't find any good examples of, like, let's say, a biogenesis in our beings or the life that we know, then why should we conclude that there is a biogenesis elsewhere in the universe or something else? But anyways, yeah. Um, yeah. This third question, which I would like to ask, is this is going to the evidence of intelligent design, and maybe if you're familiar with the debate going on between evolution and intelligent design, then for example, you would recognize that there is different problems like debate between missing links in fossil records or the mutations and so on. So regarding to that, I would like to ask, does entropy create problems to evolution, according to you guys?
Bringing up genetic entropy?
Yeah.
Yeah, the entropy argument isn't one that I've personally put a whole lot of study into. I know, I think John Sanford was the first person to put this forward when he published his book, Genetic Entropy and the Mystery of the Genome, where he basically argued that because the human genome, or just all genomes, get more corrupt over time just due to mutations, and so, whatever you pass on to your children, whatever genetics are transferred over to offspring, are always more corrupt. And so, we have systems that fix the problems, the mutations that occur, but everything doesn't get fixed. And so his basic argument was that this has to, this obviously could not have been built up by mutations. The system never could have been built by mutations because mutations are deleterious. Sanford's argument, there's debates on it, and I'm not as up on that debate as perhaps I should be. But Sanford's argument has come under a lot of criticism, claims that he's misrepresented the sources that he used and stuff. He's, of course, said that he hasn't. I'm not sure, who's right in that side. But I do know that Michael Behe has recently released his book called Darwin Devolves, and he makes a similar argument that mutations do indeed cause loss of information. Even good mutations, or ones that cause benefit, say that he had these benefits were caused as a result of a net loss of information. So ultimately, information was being lost, and so the argument was the same, that you couldn't get organisms built by a process that was ultimately destroying the information that was crucial for the building. And of course, the debate's still going on with Behe. I know Behe is a good scientist and a careful thinker, and he has responded to his criticisms. So far as I'm aware, Behe's argument is sound and more robust and based on more up-to-date science than Stanford's. But to answer your question, basically, yes, there's a problem here with the mechanism for evolution that's supposed to build things. It only works by destroying things.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, do you, Mark, have any insights on this question?
Yeah, I'd say that's outside of my field of study.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, personally, what I would say is that entropy is, well, I don't have time to go into the scientific data here, but I have some articles and papers which I would like to discuss. But anyways, for example, the idea of entropy is well recognized thing in the biological organisms. And the reason, well, there is a couple of reasons, like the errors in epigenetic interpretation or expression, I would say, in genes or genome, and different kinds of toxics or poisons or whatever you want to call them, like, for example, chemicals which affect your DNA or the system in itself, like alcohol or something else. When alcohol, what I mean by alcohol is the typical ethanol, which we humans drink as well, which can lead to, like, for example, cancer in different organs and so forth. And it also affects your genome in the sense that your repairing systems inside your cell are not able to fix all the problems which these factors cause. And so, yeah, and when it comes to mutations in general, I don't think the data actually supports much the idea that mutations cause anything good in organisms. And the reason is that as further we have gone in this studies or the data about or concerning the mutations, the more clear it becomes that the true mechanism behind all the adaptations inside organisms are actually epigenetical expressions, like, for example, histone acetylation, methylation in DNA, non-coding RNAs, and so forth, which affect and express the genes which are already in the organism. And thus they actually, the organisms and different species can variate in many different ways, which we humans, interestingly, we don't have the same kind of capacity in our genome or the expression of genes, although we have different colors of skin, which is precisely because of the epigenetical expression and how how the cells function in general. But yeah, anyways, I don't think I go much further in this. So the other question related to this issue when it comes to species and evolution in general is the problem of missing links. And so what I would like to ask from especially from David is that is there actually any missing links?
Oh, tons of them. Yeah, the fossil record is characterized by missing links, and I guess we should explain what we mean by missing link. Under the assumption of common ancestry, or universal common ancestry, that is, universal common descent, you have the idea that all life goes back to this single common ancestor, and by means of mutation, natural selection, or even if you reject the neo-Darwinian mechanism and you adopt different mechanism, structuralism, or whatever, you have this idea that all life is related, and that goes, way back to the origin of life itself. Well, a prediction of that, then, of course, is that all modern forms of life should be connected back to this single ancestor. And theoretically, the fossil record should preserve some of that for us. Now, the basic issue is that that we don't see this pattern. We don't have this tree-like pattern emerging in the fossil record. Quite the opposite, on the other hand. We have just like the fossil record is characterized by just various explosions that appear. All these animals appear here, a bunch of different ones appear here, a bunch of different ones appear here, and we don't have this gradual tree-like pattern. We don't have we don't see these slowly becoming these, and right up to the different forms of life that we have today. And so that's called missing links. Missing because they're not there, links because they're necessary to preserve the tree of life. Now, the typical explanation of this is that the fossil record is incomplete. And of course, that's true. We're not going to demand that every single form of life have been preserved. Certainly most aren't preserved. And I mean, I wouldn't even go as far as to demand that, they be able to connect the whole tree together. But we should have the basic pattern, right? We should have, most of it there. And we know this from what we know about the fossil record. If we examine the fossil record, just check current forms of life and how much of that is preserved in the fossil record. I think of terrestrial vertebrates, it's something like 98% of all known terrestrial vertebrates are represented as fossils. And, at lower levels of classification, that will get smaller. At some, I think we have 66% and stuff. But the point is vastly more gets preserved than doesn't. And we just don't have that kind of correspondence for all the missing links you would have to have. We got to posit 90% of these are missing. And then the missing links that, that are no longer missing, the links that they do bring forward to connect the forms of life together, so Tiktaalik would be an example of this. They're extremely problematic. They appear in the wrong places in the fossil record. For example, Tiktaalik appears after we already knew tetrapods existed. Of course, you could say that, fishopods already existed. And so, we just got in this Tiktaalik survived and, got preserved after the tetrapods did. But then that becomes kind of ad hoc. You're just looking at the morphology of animals and sticking them in this tree pattern, but you're not actually getting your tree pattern from the fossil evidence. Instead, you're just making it fit in, so so that you have something that's filling in that gap, which is kind of an embarrassment for your hypothesis of common descent. So yeah, I would say missing links are a problem. We, of course, don't expect all of them to be preserved, but a lot is missing, a lot more than should be, just given what we know about the fossil record. We know the fossil record is pretty accurate at recording the basic forms of life that exist, and we're missing a lot of those. And probably the most obvious example of this is the Cambrian explosion, where we have marine life just come into existence. Absolutely nothing that could be plausible precursors prior to the Cambrian explosion. And I would just recommend Stephen Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt, if anyone really wants to examine the problem of missing fossils for the theory of common descent.
Yeah, that's really good points which you bring up. I think it's interesting that, the idea that there's still missing links is well, some evolutionists they think that it's not a true problem for their theory. Well, sure, it's necessarily not the problem in a sense that you could always explain away those problems. But if you think, here is a quotation which Darwin himself, in his book The Origin of Species, brought up, is really essential if you think his theory and all the other variations of the theories in evolution is when you read Darwin himself, where he says in page 280, and he says, why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of the geological record. And so, sure, you could just dismiss Darwin's point here, but that is, well, he himself saw this issue when he was looking evidence in for his theory. And so, sure, we have two different models in this issue when it comes to fossils, which is the common descent idea, which, as you pointed out, Dave, that it's really problematic. And two, the idea that there is, well, I guess there is more ideas as well, but you don't have to take those others rather than these two interpretations of the fossil record. Yeah, so the second option is the idea that there is different ancestors, which, if you look the fossil records or data, you can see species, like there is these original species which were designed or created, and then within those species you can see variation going on and different kinds of hybrids or different kinds of animals within that species will appear also in fossil records. And yeah, I think that is the case when you consider the vast amount of data. So yeah, do you, by the way, David, have any like a quick source of where somebody would check these things which you said, like the evidence for missing links?
Yeah, I mean, before I recommended Stephen Meyer's book, Darwin's Doubt, and I think that's a good one to look at for anyone who wants to examine problems for the theory of common descent from the fossil record. I also detailed this in my own video that I did on the fossil record. So, if you just kind of want to look at, I think it's about like a 20-minute video. I try to condense all the evidence together there. So yeah, it's called Examining the Fossil Record on my channel, Faith Because of Reason. A good book that like talks about the philosophy behind the problems with missing fossils for the theory of common descent, I'd recommend William Dembski and Jonathan Wells' book, The Design of Life. You can probably get a used copy pretty cheap, and there's a lot of information in that book, but they really go into the philosophical reasoning that this is a problem for evolution. They go, they give you the exact percentages of what we know that the fossil record preserves from what we have. They show that that is not what, that it doesn't correspond to how much is missing for the theory of evolution. And so then they just build their argument off of that. If you want refutations to specific missing links, Discovery Institute, I think it is, has a book out called Explore Evolution. They go through the Therapsid to mammal transition in there, give you the details on that. Tiktaalik gets taken down in a lot of books. Jonathan Wells' book, Zombie Science, he goes through the whale transition in there. His book, Icons of Evolution, takes out Archaeopteryx. Yeah, so I mean, if you want to look at the specifics, there's a lot of different books I could get into. But if you're just looking for like a general, the basic problem, then I would say Dembski and Wells' book, The Design of Life.
Yeah, awesome. I mean, I guess there is enough books which we should go through if we want to just briefly know about these issues. And yeah, by the way, we have Tim here as well. So welcome, Tim.
What's up, guys? How's it going?
We're good. How are you?
Great. Just got home from class today, so kind of just raced home to get on here.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do, and do you have YouTube channel and so forth?
Cool. Yeah, so my name's Tim. I run the Invoking Theism YouTube channel right now, and I think I have about 12 videos up right now. I'm approaching maybe 600 subscribers at the moment. I don't upload often because I don't really have the time to really sit down and edit for an hour or whatnot, or edit a couple minutes of a video at a time. So I'm always active on my Facebook and mainly my Twitter. I can just kind of put things out easily there, which is Invoking Theism, both of those. But really my main interest is I'm really drawn to the philosophy and mainly the metaphysics of pretty much most things. That's how my mind works. So that's kind of the whole purpose of my channel, is basically providing a theistic interpretation, which is the best one, of pretty much all facets of knowledge that we can really kind of comprehend and ascertain. Kind of is always a theistic foundation for those things. And so that's kind of what you'll find on my channel. Just released a video called Our Arguments Evidence, dispelling kind of the online atheist kind of platitude that arguments aren't evidence, which is really just scientism in disguise by people who don't understand logic. So I go through that, and that's my newest one. Right now, I have a couple videos. I want to respond to Sean Carroll on his views of his views of the universe and how and whatnot, and the implications of those, and the problems with that, and how he kind of just assumes naturalism, really. But I won't say too much. So I'm kind of writing that at the moment. And then I want to kind of go through a coherence of theism series as well. I currently have an argument right now for the coherence of an infinite nature, where I can show that it is completely coherent for God to have an infinite nature in all of his qualities. So, and I plan on doing some evolution stuff, and making an evolutionary argument against materialism, and why evolution sits better with theism than it does materialism in terms of laws of nature, fine-tuning the mind, consciousness, and whatnot. So those are kind of some things to expect, I guess.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and thanks for the short description of your channel as well. I mean, you have a good basic content as well there.
Okay.
And yeah, so we were before you came here, we were discussing about the idea of intelligent design and what does it imply. For example, is ID science? What does it tell about the nature of designer? Or does the famous entropy cause problems to evolution? Or is there any missing links? So so correct me if I'm wrong, but are you theistic evolutionist?
Yeah. Currently, right now, I see no problem really embracing it at the moment. I really love the study, honestly. I think evolution, biological evolution, is a really fascinating subject. And so right now, I am currently reading source material from mainly Christian kind of they like to be called evolutionary creationists, but people who kind of have gotten there, who understand it. People like Seigart, who's a biochemist, in his newest book, The Works of His Hands, he gives a kind of a really actually compelling argument in terms of the theistic evolutionary case, and how his kind of his biochemistry background, understanding of that, led him to see design in it. I think evolution is actually a design, is a great design inference. So I'm studying kind of that. I really want to have a robust understanding of the theory itself before I move into kind of the anti-evolutionary crowd and looking at their critiques, because I need to kind of have the foundation to know how to think about such critiques. It's like you don't read The God Delusion alongside On Guard at the same time when you're first getting into apologetics. You're not gonna know what you're thinking. You're not gonna know what to do. So same way there. I want to read Simon Conway Morris. I want to read Stephen Jay Gould and all his most of his books. I want to get into Francis Collins stuff. I'm reading Perry Marshall's book right now, Evolution 2.0, just kind of jumping into that, kind of getting a more of a seeing kind of the paradigm he introduces into it. But so far, I mean, from what I've seen, kind of the basic understanding of it, I'm really down with. I am totally against neo-Darwinism as being the complete understanding of explanation of all complexity. I don't think it is. So that's where ID and I agree. Really, most most evolutionary creationists agree that neo-Darwinism is an incomplete synthesis. That's kind of where I feel like the Royal Society meeting really gets kind of strawmanned a little bit, because really it's just we need to opt in for an extended synthesis. I mean, that's just really what it is. I mean, you can only go so far with a Newtonian understanding of physics and gravity, so you need Einstein. Now we need quantum gravity. It's the same thing. It's the same thing applied to biology. So like origin of life research, that's really chemistry first. So a lot of understanding with biochemistry and whatnot helps there. And really biology is a somewhat, our most deepest understanding of it is somewhat of a new kind of understanding. Really. I mean, Newton and all the other guys were looking at the stars and stuff before we understood how the cell worked. So there's a lot of kinks to be worked out in just kind of how mechanisms work and really the ingenuity of kind of how our inner systems work and whatnot. So I'm interested in really understanding those things. I just downloaded a paper, an Evo Devo paper on the constraints of evolution, and so that's really cool. Fits with more of instead of a functionalist paradigm, fits better with the structuralist paradigm of constraints. That's why you don't have large flying mammals or things like that. You just don't get those because it's just the constraints that are involved. But that's kind of a brief kind of my take and position on it. I agree with a lot of the stuff ID says, but I don't go as far as they do with a lot of things. So, and again, I'm still trying to advance my understanding of the topic itself, so I can give more of an educated opinion on it, rather than one that is not one that is. So I don't want to speak too soon on anything. So this is kind of the infancy of where I'm at right now. But so far, I really like the position I sit in. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. And although, personally, I don't view myself as a theistic evolutionist, probably just a general proponent or adherent of intelligent design. Still, I can see the basic idea behind theistic evolution, namely structuralism or other views within that frame. Yeah, that framework. Like, for example, when you consider the fine-tuning aspect in theistic evolution, although you could show that intelligent design in itself would be false, depending on what you mean by intelligent design, still you could call yourself as in some sense intelligent designer, because in order you to be theistic evolutionist, it necessarily implies that there is designer behind that process.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's why I like what Seigart says in his book. He prefers the term divine design. It gives much more majesty to the understanding of it. And I can unpack that and stuff if you guys haven't read the book. One, I highly recommend getting it, but two, I can kind of unpack kind of what he means by that. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's all design. It's all design.
Yeah. So we already discussed about these different questions which I asked, but I would like to ask you that is intelligent design science, or do you see it as a science, or scientific theory? I would say, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you like talk to someone like Stephen Meyer or whatever, he refers to it as a science starter rather than a science stopper. And I see what he means by that. Really, I mean, I always see it, and then David, you can since you are the idea proponent, you can correct me where you see me going off track. But I see it as, in terms of a physical theory, it really hasn't done anything to replace, to outdo the theory of evolution, really. It's not a alternative theory to biology. That's not really what it is. But rather it's offering a different explanatory way of things, or a way to see things in an explanatory way. And as far as that goes, then that's not, to me, that's not a physical scientific theory. It's like, to overturn Big Bang cosmology, you got to provide a different model of space-time, right? Of our understanding. You can go from classical to quantum, right? That's kind of what you'd have to do, just providing analogies. Intelligent design is not an alternative to biology in terms of how to study the field, rather than providing more explanatory. They think it has better explanatory power, depth, and whatnot to how we understand biological systems to work and whatnot, and the structures and the body plans that emerge, etc. That's where I see it. So I don't think it's enough to show the flaws and the lack of understanding in certain areas, and then fit in your explanation is enough to I guess, to make it science. Like science is involved. Like, they're all scientists, right? I mean, that's how they can really look at these things in the way that they do. But I don't think ID itself is an alternative alternative understanding of biology, and the diversity of life, the way that kind of biological evolution kind of presents itself. So, am I making sense the way I'm articulating that? Not that I'm right, but am I making sense?
Yeah.
I think
do you want to? Yeah. Go on, David.
What was that?
Yeah. If you have anything to say, you can respond, or if you feel.
Well, all right. I don't want to leave Marek out, but no, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with what he said, but I would have to know what he means by biological evolution when Tim says that. When he says that ID hasn't replaced it, or I mean, obviously it hasn't in the minds of people, but I mean, are you just saying that it doesn't offer like a history of life in the way that the way that evolution would? Because I mean, on that I can agree.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. Like going with my kind of analogy, going back to Newton and Einstein. We have a better understanding of gravity and physics due to Einstein's equations, understanding of physics, right? Now, with that and that kind of analogy in place, I don't think that's what ID has done with evolution or biology, even. I don't think that's what's going on there. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's not an alternative theory. I don't think you are either. I don't think you are offering an alternative theory to the biological sciences, to where the textbooks in 30 years from now will not contain what they contain now, with something different that scientists will go, yeah, without a doubt, we can't really go back to this, and that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And then you said, let's see, what I mean by evolution in terms of biology.
So that's what it sounded like you were saying. You were saying like it hadn't offered an alternative to
Yeah, I feel like their main concern is how do we really reconcile the little holes that neo-Darwinism has in it, in terms of its explanatory power, in terms of complexity in systems and whatnot. I feel like that's kind of where ID emerges from, is those little areas. And so that's why it goes back to why it's crucial, why I kind of gave, if you look at how long the field of biology has been around and how much we understand when we first started really understanding the cell, and now we have things like biochemistry or fields and whatnot, and everything. And I mean, we first found out that the brain was really plastic in the 80s and things like that, just kind of knowing kind of how we don't have a huge understanding of this stuff yet, like as much as we could. I feel like the trajectory of it is that over time, these sciences will become more robust, and certain holes where we're filling in, we're plopping in design, will really just have ordinary naturalistic explanations. It's just like, for example, origin of life research. I don't know where you sit with that, but that's all, chemistry precedes biology. And so our understanding of that really needs to have a more robust understanding of chemistry when it applies to biology. And so, do we live in a RNA world or a DNA dominated world? What was first? Was there a replicator of some sort, or was there DNA and whatnot? Those are things to be figured out as we progress in our understanding of chemistry right now. I mean, it's origin of life research. It's not even we're not even at a theory yet. So very much in the infancy of that stuff. And I feel like where you could plug in God, if you feel like that's where God needs to be plugged in, then what happens when you don't need to plug him in anymore? That's why the position that I have.
Yeah, that's
What was that?
It feels like you're making kind of like a God of the gaps charge there, then that intelligent design just plugs gaps in the understanding with design. And I think that would be to misunderstand. That would be to misunderstand the theory. The theory isn't just, saying we don't know how to explain this, therefore design. Say something like origin of life. Stephen Meyer's argument would be that we know that life is based on information, whether you go with DNA or RNA first. And I detailed this on my video on the origin of life. But whichever one you go through, whichever model you take, it's information. We all agree that information precedes life. So he says, based on our experience, we do know where information comes from. So we're not just saying, oh, I don't know what did this design. We're saying, because we know what does this, because we know what creates information, namely mind, intelligence, intelligent design, then we can use that as an explanation for, say, the origin of life. Now, if somebody wants to come up with a way that we can get information without reference to intelligence, then intelligent design becomes falsified. But we're not just, saying, oh, we don't know how life began, so it must have been God. That would be total God of the gaps.
Right, yeah, exactly. And you kind of, saw what I was trying to say. Yeah, now I think it's best to really kind of ground really what the God of the gaps really actually means, because it is an informal fallacy. So what it is God of the gaps has to do with in term of explanation. There's two types of explanations. There's explanation in terms of initial conditions, laws of nature, and then there's explanations in terms of volition and agents. There's agency, and then there's the initial conditions, laws of nature. Those are two types of explanations you can offer. Now, the God of the gaps is rightfully used when there is an explanation in terms of initial conditions and laws of nature, and then you insert into those processes God, where you don't have an understanding. That's where the God of the gaps actually works, instead of it complementing each other. And I know you're familiar with the analogy John Lennox uses in terms of explanations to complement each other. So my thing is, what if ID is, I'm going to use more modest language here. What if ID is inserting kind of, because remember, it's not offering anything different. It's not offering anything new. It's not offering new mechanisms. It's not, in those ways. It's just making design inferences off these kind of, off of the things that evolution kind of struggles with and lacks right now. Now, since those are explanations in terms of initial conditions, laws of nature, if there is one, and one that it lacks right now, then you're inserting a design inference into a process where it doesn't need to be placed. And so then you're pitting up that natural explanation against the one that goes against the agent, where really, because this is where, I guess it helps to really outline kind of where I sit in the view, is I am perfectly fine with most things having naturalistic explanations, because I think that at the most biochemical level, when it comes to life and things, teleology is there. It's in place. That's it. Like space-time itself, the fabric it has teleology built in through its underlying foundation, and then everything emerges from that point. So I am not surprised if we have naturalistic explanations for things. I know that it's because it's due to a divine mind that has created everything to work in that way. I think certain Thomists don't like the idea of a mechanistic universe, but I don't see the universe purely as mechanism, but because I am a dual aspect idealist, so there is that part too, which I think really helps philosophically explain why there is such thing as the ingenuity of a self, and whatnot. So that's kind of where I sit, which is I am quite confident that certain areas that the modern synthesis of evolution is struggling to explain right now will always stay that way. That's kind of where I'm at, because I just feel like at the underlying foundation of physical reality, teleology is there. That's why the kind of the structuralist paradigm that I think it works, makes sense when it comes to like constraints by the laws of nature, initial conditions and whatnot, because that makes sense. You kind of the periodic table of elements kind of gives you what you would have for biology and things like that in terms of chemistry. So our understanding those things. Not saying that they're like abstract entities that are interacting with the universe, but rather our understanding of these forces of nature kind of give us an idea why certain things are the way they are, rather than in a different way. So that's kind of my position if that makes sense to you at all.
No, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Do you want to continue with that, Miska, or I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
transition to the theology of it?
yeah. I would like to listen and discuss about the scientific aspect and especially philosophical aspect of this uh, issue, but unfortunately we have limited amount of time, and so yeah, the next uh, aspect which is really important when it comes to uh, creation in itself is the theological aspect as well. And so Marek especially has a background on this issue. So let me just make a first question for Marek, especially that what does the Genesis 1 and 2 tell about the nature of creation? Does it imply young earth creationism or anything else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's some important distinctions to make. We can have, sorry, my lighting isn't very good in my house. It's pretty bad. We can designate, okay, Genesis 1 is teaching X, Y, Z, or we could say the point of it, is it theological over scientific? But at the same time, I wouldn't want to exclude those two things. So as a progressive creationist and a concordist, I would say, while I think the meaning is theological over scientific, I don't think it teaches young earth creationism whatsoever. I'm personally convinced of a day age view of Genesis 1. I think it's a rather clear exegesis. I wouldn't want to go too far on either of the sides. I wouldn't want to say, oh, this is just scientific, like the Kinham stuff. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to go so far to say that we can't infer certain things about creation out of it. I don't want to go so far where I can't, where it's just the A&E view. And I think that stuff is amazing. It's great. But at the same time, I don't want to go to the too far side of it where it's just kind of the fringe stuff where we can infer about God's creation from it. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't think it teaches young earth creationism.
Yeah, that was.
No, that made sense to me. Yeah, you're a progressive creationist, so to you, Ross. Yeah, I get that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hudras is well, if you want to know about old Earth creationism, for example, I would recommend him, and he has interesting explanations regarding to Genesis 1 especially. Yeah. So the second question which I would like to ask is if the young Earth creationism is not the valid explanation exegetically, then what about Romans 5 verse 12?
In regards to the death of animals.
Yeah, especially the death in general. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. I don't find the Romans 5 objection convincing at all. I think if you merely read the verse, it's clear it's not speaking of animals. It's not speaking of a pre-fall vegetarianism, no carnivorous activity. I think you just have to insert that into the text. But what I do find a little bit more convincing is the Romans 8 view, specifically verses 19 through 22. It's definitely a more sophisticated version of the argument, but I still think it fails. Excuse me, I'm sick. And the reason I say this is because I think scholarship has really shown that in the back of Paul's mind when he's writing it, he's got this idea of this apocalyptic vision in Isaiah 24 through 27. And so when we look at it, it's clear it's not speaking of, oh my gosh, my lighting is horrible. It's not speaking of a pre-fall vegetarianism state. It's not saying animals didn't die before the fall. It's referencing back to this apocalyptic vision, and so that's what I'd say about those two areas in Romans. We have other places like in Isaiah 11, the lion lay down with the lamb. I don't find these convincing either. I think it's referring to a utopian vision. If you notice all of the animals that are mentioned, it's referring to the well-being of people. These are farm animals. Obviously not the lion and the lamb, but there's a lot of scholarship around this that really just shows the young earth view is not the only possible exegesis of these verses. Then of course you have the Genesis 1 verses 28 through 30, people saying where it says I give you this to eat, the vegetation, seed-bearing fruit. I'm sure you guys know of Joshua John Van Ee's dissertation titled Death in the Garden. He examines these verses, and I think he makes a very good point that the prior verse where humans are called to subdue and have dominion over the fish of the sea, birds of the air, it very clearly connotates killing animals, enslaving animals. I haven't seen any good refutations of this, but I think the most sophisticated objection to this is in Genesis 9. Let me pull up the verse here. I'm actually having a debate on this subject. So Genesis 9, 3 through 4 says, let's see. This is right after the ark. Everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you the green plants, I now give you everything. And then it goes on to mention prohibitions in regards to blood. So people might say, well, so he gave it before, but now he didn't give it before. Now he's giving it meat, right? That doesn't make sense. There's a basically it's a Hebraic formula that's used that it always starts when it's explaining prohibitions. There's many examples of this, but we can go to Deuteronomy 14, for example, if you want to study that. It's very cool. It starts with the classic Hebraic structure and formula. It gives the title, like a green plant, I give to you everything, and then it goes in, but only meat of which the blood is in it you may not eat. So there's a lot of scholarship in these verses. It demonstrates it's not teaching that animals didn't die before the fall, and not to mention I think there's very, very good positive evidence for animal death. I think one, we have the argument from Genesis 1:28, which I'm sure you're familiar with, but then there's a not so much familiar argument based around Psalm 104 and how Psalm 104 portrays animal death as God's design. And it's really interesting. So I'd really suggest looking into it. I think it's just the coolest thing. But yeah.
Do you know what verse in Psalm 104?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I'm having a debate on this topic. So let me open my slide. Psalm 104. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I didn't know about that. That's cool.
Yeah. Let me open my slide. You guys can talk about something. Okay, I actually got it here. Let's see. I'm in my debate Google Doc because it's going to be a scripted debate. But let me share my screen. So this is one of my rebuttals to my scripted debate that me and my buddy Cody are working on. I'm sorry, it's kind of small here. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a polemic against the Egyptian Atenhem. It's all about creation. Some assert that parts of it are about the flood. No, it's really about creation. But verses 14, he grows the grass for the cattle, yada, yada, yada. So it's talking about creation, God's original design. If we look at starting in 27, I don't know what translation this is. Sorry. All creatures look to you to give them their food at their proper time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hands, they are satisfied with good things. When you hide your face, they are terrified. When you take away their breath, they die and return to the dust. And then at the end, may the glory of the Lord endure forever. May the Lord rejoice in his works. And basically what this argument is doing is pointing out the inconsistency between these verses and the young earth creationist view. Because on the young earth view, we wouldn't expect these verses to portray animal death as something that the Lord rejoices in, right? This is something on the young earth view that is a result of man's sin and wretched depravity, not a result of God opening his sovereign hand as Psalm 104 teaches. But that's basically the argument. There's verses in Job 38 speaking of the lion cub, and the Lord giving it food. But that's the gist of the argument.
Interesting. So,
No, that's good. That makes sense.
yeah. So, do you guys have any other questions to Marek, or specifically about the main issues or objections against, like, the progressive creationism?
Yeah, I'm not a progressive creationist. I mainly because grammatically and hermeneutically, I don't think concordism is really something that we should be practicing. I think like most people who are researching this stuff for the first time, they come across Hugh Ross, and I think Hugh Ross inserts a hermeneutical understanding in places that, to me, are just kind of sometimes bizarre. Especially if you look at his view of God's relationship to time, it's kind of like a weird hyper time type view. It's just kind of strange. But because where I see concordism landing is it's convenient into which the time that you're living, which is it's funny how an ancient text is referring to a 21st understanding of science. And it's funny how you would interpret that text certain places scientifically according to which time you're standing in. So in the 24th century, what if our certain understanding of science changes, and that will be the interpretation of the text. So I don't think that's something that we should go with, especially with the day-age view. For me, I think grammatically, just using that method, looking at the days, I think it's quite plainly 24 hours. I agree with Walton and Heiser, and Walter Kaiser and all those guys on that. That is just the 24-hour days grammatically, but on a kind of on a planetary kind of view of it in terms of relationship to the sun and stuff, that's not kind of what it's referring to. So grammatically, the days are 24 hours. It just seems that seems to be just plain and simple when we look at the grammar and things. So I don't practice concordism anymore. I don't look at the days like that anymore, because you don't need the days to not be 24 hours to not be an Earth creationist. It's not required of you. So I guess, what are your thoughts? Have you looked into? I mean, this is just an open question. I mean, how many Hebrew scholars say that's how that should be looked at?
Oh, definitely. Tons of them, I'd say. You mentioned Walt Kaiser. He's actually a day-age creationist. He believes that the ages are, or the days are long periods of time. Did you say Michael Heiser or Walter Kaiser?
I think I said both.
Okay, yeah.
I will, on the Walter Kaiser part. Thank you for the correction. I will make sure that does not that's not said again. So that's good. But I said Michael Heiser, though. I did say that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go into here, gents. I do want to say, actually, though, I agree with your concerns about concordism. I'm not necessarily a concordist in that, like, I don't think that the scripture is generally trying to teach us scientific truths, but I do think it's trying to teach us historical truths, and so there, in many cases. And so when it comes to Genesis, we would have to assess if it's trying to communicate historical truths there or not. And so that is what lands me in with Hugh Ross there on that particular thing. But awesome. I will let Marek respond, and I'm just gonna have to bounce everyone. So
yeah, see ya.
All right, see you, man.
Yeah,
it's been great.
Yeah, and thank you, David, for joining.
Yeah, my pleasure.
In the first place. Yeah,
great to meet you, Marek and Tim. I haven't talked to either of you before, so yeah.
Yeah, good meeting you, man. Thanks for coming on.
See ya. But yeah, so there's a lot of different definitions of concordism, so I definitely say we have to be careful. But one thing I would say is, and this is really important. Sorry, my lighting is really bad. I don't use concordism to get a day-age theory. I don't think I need to be a concordist to get a day-age interpretation of Genesis 1. I think it's just see, every day I become more and more convinced of this position. Just exegetically, I don't think the text can be more clear that these days aren't 24-hour periods. I think this is just my personal convictions, and me and my friend Cody Sorensen are working on this a lot. We're very, very convinced of a long creation days, and just the emphasis would be it's not a requirement to be a concordist to have long creation days. I don't.
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, my concordism isn't where I get day age from, even though I'd still agree with it.
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah, I'm speaking in term because let's see if I'm getting this right. Grammatically, so are you agreeing grammatically that the days are not 24 hours?
Yes.
Okay, so where do you get the idea that I guess that exegesis of the days that they are not 24 hours, and just in the grammatical sense? I'm not talking in the sense of their relation to how basically anything material. I'm talking specifically about kind of the grammatical historical kind of way to look at the days in Genesis. Where do you pull out the day age view from? It just concerning the kind of the grammar, I guess.
Yeah. So I'll just try to be really quick. Obviously, it's very easy to demonstrate the word for day. Means a plethora of different things. It can mean an age, normal day, tons of different things. No one disagrees. Obviously, that's not an argument for my position, but it's important we have the understanding. So some of my reasons would be if it was to be 24 hours, we would expect the definite articles in the Hebrew to be different with literally it doesn't mean the first day and the second day. This is something that Gleason Archer would point out. Secondly, I think I think the events within the days are very clearly portrayed as not 24 hours. I think on the third day, I'll actually share my screen really quick. On the third day, we have it's portrayed as let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, yada, yada, yada. If we look at the NASB footnote, it's referring to Psalm 104. He causes grass to grow for the cattle, vegetation for the labor of man, etc. That's just one short thing. So another argument would be, so one, we've got the definite articles. Two would be how it's portrayed, the amount of events. So on the sixth day, Adam, he names all the animals. He works in the garden. He marries Eve. He goes into deep sleep. All these things. Not to mention the understanding behind the seventh day, where we're still in the seventh day. I think Hebrews 4 and Psalm 95 are very explicit that we're still in the seventh day. You'd probably agree.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then, so you're probably thinking, well, what about the evenings and mornings, right? In Genesis 1, right?
I mean, yeah. We can, evening and morning, signifying the end of creation on that specific day. Yeah.
Yeah. So to that, I'd basically say, when you think about it, an evening and morning isn't a 24-hour period. It's actually 12 hours. Have you thought of that? Because it would be 24 hours if it's evening to evening or morning to morning.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
so that's one thing I'd bring up. The second
Mhm.
thing is that the sun isn't. The purpose of having the sun is to set times for days and years, etc. So someone like Walter Kaiser would say the idea of a 24-hour yom is made on the fourth day. So how could the first 3 days be 24-hour periods as humanity defines them if the sun isn't visible yet? So that's another thing I would say to that. And then the lack of an evening and morning on the seventh day, because the seventh day is ongoing. That shows a poetic use of evening and morning
Right.
as a clear marker of a finite beginning and ending of each of God's creative acts. And then one quick thing I want to share, and this is kind of just speculation, but I think it's kind of cool. I think this is consistent with the New Testament teaching. Let me open this up. If we go to Hebrews 11, verse 3, Now by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. If we go to the footnote here, literally ages, the word ionos right here. I emailed Walter Kizer about this, and he's like, yeah, this is definitely consistent with a day-age view. And so I know this is cringy, but if we go to the Amplified Bible, and this isn't to argue for it, but it's just to show what other people have picked up. It writes it as, by faith we understand that the worlds during the successive ages were framed. So just little things like that, little parts in the New Testament where it's consistent with the day age view, but just little things like that convince me of it. And I just realized
Okay.
that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing
Mhm.
a better glimpse into your view. That's really good.
Yeah.
Um, that's cool. That's cool. All the different reference points. I think that's really, really good for the for anyone who's younger to consider. You know,
Mhm.
I think that would be a good place to start for someone who thinks that no, everything must be interpreted literally. I think that'd be a good place to introduce them to kind of the hermeneutical kind of principles and things like that. How like verses. I think that'd be really helpful.
So
Yeah.
do you have a cosmic temple view?
What was that?
What's your views? The cosmic temple view?
Yeah, I would say that Genesis 1, material origins is not the focus.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Cool.
Yeah, and I think that taking that kind of mytho-historical look at it and kind of primeval history and seeing the way that it's written, um, and kind of taking the the theological text,
Mm-hmm.
and so the theological things you take away from it, is is God preparing a place to dwell with His creation and the creation of His priests and priestesses to be His imagers, his image bearers. They both mean the same thing, Adam and Eve, and things like that. There's a much deeper story being told. The material stuff is mentioned and everything like that, but
Mm-hmm.
we often, like for example, young earthers, they will look at it and they'll look at it as if a historian was standing around watching all the events happening and then writing them down. And with the way that it's written, and the literary structure and stuff and the grammar, um, uh, really makes us look at the story differently than how you would a really historical type of view, even one that includes material origins and whatnot. So that's where I sit. Um, and
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
there you.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to this cosmic temple idea, I think John Walton has a really good um, point on his book, The Lost World of Adam and Eve, Genesis 2-3. So yeah, he basically says, and I quote, when Jesus talks about the Sabbath, he makes statements that seem unrelated to rest if we think of it in terms of relaxation. In Matthew 12, verse 8, he is the Lord of Sabbath. When we realize that the Sabbath it has to do with participating in God's ordered system rather than promoting our own activities as those that bring us order, we can understand how Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Throughout his controversies with the Pharisees, Jesus insisted that it was never a violation of the Sabbath to do the work of God on that day. Indeed, he noted that God is continually working. The Sabbath is most truly honored when we participate in the work of God. And the work we desist from is which represents our own attempts to bring our own order to our lives. It is to resist our self-interest, our self-sufficiency, and our sense of self-reliance. And I think, you know, especially the beginning of this quote is really important when you think about the cosmic temple idea and the idea which is found in Hebrews 4, which you mentioned, Mark, by the way. And so yeah, and the second point, which I also agree with you guys, or at least how I view this issue when it talks about Yom in Hebrew, which is a day or something else, is pretty much well recognized among different scholars, that it is not necessarily a 24 hours description of a thing, and as you said, it's describing 12 hours and 12 hours. But anyways, according to lexiconconcordance.com, the Yom is described as a period of light, as a contrasted with the period of darkness. As you said, there is a function going on, especially when it talks about creating day and night. And it's also described as a general term of time, and it is also described as a point of time, sunrise to sunset, sunset to next sunset, a year, which is found in plural, especially in First Samuel chapter 27 verse 7 and Exodus 13 verse 10. And then it is also defined as a time period of unspecific length, which I previously pointed out as well before we were recording. And the last point, or the last definition, would be a long but finite span of time, which is age, an epoch, a season, etc., etc. And so the places in the Old Testament where you can find Yom in context is sometimes translated as time, especially in the Genesis 4 verse 3, and then Isaiah chapter 30 verse 8, and then you can see this description of year, which is found elsewhere, like First King chapter 1 verse 1, Second Chronicles chapter 21 verse 19, and Amos chapter 4 verse 4, and 8 is found in Genesis 18 24 47 and so on. And the season is found in Genesis 40, Joshua 24, Second Chronicles 15, and so on and so on. So
Yeah,
I mean, this is, I could go on and on.
Yeah, right.
But,
yeah, there's just
yeah.
no, I don't think anyone really disagrees that it can mean a lot of different things. I think the real
No,
question
right.
is what does it mean in this
Right.
context.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Right. No. I would not put
Yeah.
myself there.
And so yeah, the reason why I quoted the John Walton here is because the Sabbath is essential theme of this cosmic temple idea as well. If you think the function of Sabbath and the seventh day, as you said in Hebrews 4 and in Psalm 95, it seems as if it is still going on. And so the main point in Genesis, I think, is the functional description of creation, giving function to different types of things, not necessarily the materialistic creation, as you guys pointed out. So
yeah, and that's where I would agree with that. Now I have two quick questions. One, Marek, What is your debate, and when is it, and what is it on?
Yeah, so I got two debates coming up actually. The first one I'm debating, well, it's more of like a scripted debate. Me and my close friend Cody, who's actually, he believes in day age, but he doesn't believe that there's animal death before the fall. We're doing a scripted debate on that topic. We've been working on it for months. Probably going to be finished somewhat soon. Robert Rowe from Sentinel Apologetics is going to help us. He's going to put it on his
Oh,
channel.
awesome.
That he's a close friend.
Yeah.
But then also, I'm going to be debating Kent Hovind pretty soon.
Hey, yeah, you know, on the bucket list.
I mean, you have to do it once, right? But
Yeah.
the main reason I want to do it is because um, I've received thumb drives from church members with his seminars on them.
Because they're trying to convert you back.
Yeah, so I'm basically just doing this for that. I want to show church members and that sort of thing.
Come back to the faith. Oh man, no. So you go to a church that is takes that view.
Yeah, very much so.
Brother, we
Yeah.
in this together, bro.
Yeah,
I grew up in my church just like that, and I
Well,
feel like I have to watch what I say.
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I think
On our missions trip, my youth group missions trip to Kentucky, we went to the Ark Encounter. So
All right, dang,
interesting.
keep doing the
Yeah.
work, bro.
So, guys, I'm sorry that I have to interrupt you, but we are getting
Yeah.
at the end of this
Okay.
discussion because it has already gone, like, I would say, over 1 hour and 30 minutes. So, and I have to
Okay.
leave as well. But guys, thank you for joining with me, and also those who watch this at the end. Thank you very much for your patience, and I hope I hope you enjoyed and got some perspective and things to think, because this is a sometimes quite broad topic, as well as another topics in different areas concerning philosophy, science, and theology. But next time I am probably going to discuss with Tim about the contingency argument. And
Hey.
so yeah, I'm really excited to go into that. And especially I want to thank Marek for giving some perspective, and especially sharing your material and work which you're doing. So thank you.
yeah, and thanks to David for sticking around and talking to us.
Yeah. So without further ado, see you guys and enjoy.
See ya.